Hello everyone, my name's Matthew Holewinski, and I'm a technical consultant here with AutoDesSys. And in this presentation today, we'll be showing you step by step how fast and easy it is to migrate to the new formZ 7. Why upgrade to formZ 7? Well, if you combine the new interface, new tools, new workflow, less clicking, and easy learning, the result is faster and more flexible 3D modeling. How much faster? Well, this project was modeled and rendered in the new formZ 7 in about 30 minutes. The same project in formZ 6 took me almost an hour. This is a 50% reduction in modeling time, not to mention about half the mouse clicks, and it was just plain easier to do with formZ's new tools, features, and workflow. Let's begin by taking a brief look at all the new learning resources that can help you get started, such as the new Getting Started panel, self-paced tutorials, video tutorials, online documentation, and workflow webinars. Also, if you right-click any tool, you can choose the manual or video option to gain instant access to step-by-step help. So let's take a moment and see where these are located so that you can access them for yourself. Let's switch over to formZ 7. And first thing I'm going to do is go to the Help pull-down menu and open up the Getting Started dialog. Now this is a dialog that should automatically open when you first launch the program, and you can turn that off over here. This gives you access to all of the step-by-step video tutorials, gives you access to all the online manual documentation, and there's also some self-guided tutorial files. Now these are formZ files that if you click to open those use the scenes palette. And with the scenes palette, we can just simply go through the different scenes, we read along with what it says on the left, and you do it for yourself on the right. And these are great introductions to learning a lot of the basic introductory features of formZ 7. Alright, so let's go ahead and close that file out here. Something else I would like to show is if you right click on any tool, you can choose a manual option. It takes you right to that page of the online manual. If you were to right click on a tool, you can also choose the view video option, and that shows you a quick little step-by-step video of how to use that particular tool. Now to access the help in the pull down menus, for example, you want to find some more information about the brand new layout space, hold down the shift key and that'll take you to that page of the manual. Alright. One last thing I'd like to mention too is if you go to our website at formz.com, you click on the webinars button over here, and there's a webinars on demand button, and inside of here you can access all sorts of pre-recorded videos of 30-minute projects that were done to highlight many of the different areas and tools and features in formZ 7 to get sort of a workflow type feel for how these tools can be used in the context of actual projects. Okay, with that, let's move on. Next thing that I would like to show is the new interface features, such as the addition of workspaces, a new heads-up display favorites panel, giving you instant access to your favorite tools, and new drag and drop toolbar customization. So let's take a quick look at that. Alright, as we go back into formZ 7 here, you can see one of the new things is we can simply move our cursor over the different tools that are there, and they automatically fly out. Alright, now we can drag those anywhere that we want on the interface, and in the previous versions of formZ, the position of the pellets was saved in a formZ preference file. Now something that's new in 7 is that the position is now saved as a workspace, and this is a new feature to be able to actually organize your project as different workspaces. The default is the modeling workspace, or getting tools that are just used for modeling your project. You can select the drafting workspace or the rendering and animation workspace, and it gives us just the tools for rendering and animating your project. Now notice if you go back to the modeling workspace, you can see it comes back exactly the way it was when we left it, and the information of where the position of these pellets are saved in your workspace environment. So when you quit and relaunch, it'll come back based on that workspace setting. So if you want to manage that further, in the workspace pull down menu, there's a workspace manager option, and here you can see that the save between sessions is automatically turned on, so it will save it between those sessions, and you can actually add and organize your workspaces inside of this workspace manager. Okay, another thing I'd like to show is the customization of the tool palettes themselves. Let's say I want to move and customize these tool palettes. Well, that's done in the new tool manager. That's accessible from the workspace pull down menu. And when this thing's open, we can customize the tools any way that we want. We're going to focus just on the top half over here, so I'm going to collapse the bottom section over here. And when this tool manager is open, I can customize these tools with a nice easy drag and drop. Okay, if I want to add a new tool palette, I can simply click on that button, and let's type in the name for my new tool palette here. Let's call it Matt's Tool tools. All right, I click OK, and there it is. We have a brand new tool palette. Now I can drag and drop tools that are already in my existing tool palettes that are there, or I can have access to every single tool listed here, and they are organized in different categories. Go to maybe the Generate Tools, and you can see I can drag and drop them from there also. Now I can also add a divider in here. Let's say I want to sort of divide these different icons. I can select the divider option, pull that inside of there, and there we go. If you want to remove tools from there, I can drag and drop them off into blank area, and they're gone. I can bring this back up there. Now, when the tool manager is open, I can also right-click any of the tools and choose the settings option to get back to the name of the tool palette and the size of the icons, and show the tool names if you want, and customize that any way that we want. Now, when we close the tool manager, we're back in the normal modeling environment. We can continue on our merry way. I probably should also mention that if you were to go into the preferences in the edit pull down menu, there's some new options in the interface, which allows us to control the color, tint, and saturation and intensity of your icons in your interface. So that's something that's new in 7 also, to be able to customize it that way. All right. Another new feature I would like to show is the new favorites panel. Just simply hit the space bar, and all your favorites tools show up at your current cursor location for instant access. So I can choose this tool, and it makes it automatically highlighted over here. Now, when the favorites panel is open, just hit any key, for example, the R key, and you can see that it lists all the tools that start with R. So I can quickly access the roof tool by using my favorites panel. Now you can see it's active over there. If you want to customize that, then you can go to the tool manager, open that up again, and in the bottom half is all the information you need to customize that favorites panel any way that you want. You drag and drop and move the icons around, and you can see that you can save and load different favorites panels based on your current task at hand. You can change the shortcut and color and transparency and things like that. But that's all customized right here inside of the tool manager palette. All right, one last thing I want to mention is if you right-click in any tool, you can instantly access the key shortcut for that. And so we can have quick access to be able to customize it that way, which is a great productivity feature. Now, of course, if you want to access the key shortcuts, we still have the key shortcuts dialog that you can open up, and all the key shortcuts are listed in different categories here. And this is pretty similar to the previous version, so I won't go too much into that. Now let's see how much faster and easy it is to actually create objects in formZ 7 with its new simplified drawing workflow. In previous versions of formZ, on the left, the parameters that control the creation of objects can be found at various locations throughout the interface. In formZ 7 on the right, we have drastically consolidated and simplified these parameters, giving you faster and easier access. So let's see how this works by creating a few objects. We're going to begin by launching formZ 6. And here's how you create an object. Well, you have to pull out one modeling tool palette, which lets you create a certain shape. Then you need to pull out another tool palette, gives you access to the object type, whether it's 2D or 3D. You need to access the pull down menu, which tells you exactly the height of the extrusions and things like that. So let's set that a graphic key. Down here is a perpendicular switch, which lets you control the parallel or perpendicular direction. And the tool options over here on the right gives you additional parameters based on what the current active tool is. So you click and create your shape. And the default is a wireframe mode or an axonometric view, which lets us infinitely zoom in and out. If we want to work in a perspective view, we can do that. We can change it to a perspective view. However, when we zoom in, we can only zoom out as far as the field of view parameters. And so if you want to infinitely zoom back and forth, the only way to do that is to go back to the axonometric view. Okay, so let's see how this works in formZ 7 now. Well, now you click a tool, and that's it. Nothing else. So where's all the parameters? There's no heights pull-down menu, no perpendicular switch. There's no other modeling tool palette you need to pull out to click on. One tool, one action. That's it. As soon as a tool is selected, it highlights red, and all the parameters are located in one spot over here. And that's in the tool options palette. So here's all of our modifiers to control whether it's 2D or 3D, and the height pull-down menu and things like that. Everything's located right there. When you create the object, we're automatically placed into a result buffer mode, which gives us instant access to all of the parameters. So we can quickly modify any of the parameters immediately after we've created that object. And if you can modify this dynamically here in the modeling window, and you can also look at the numeric information inside of that tool options palette. Okay, if we hit escape key, Now the controls are gone or just start doing some other modeling operation, and we're out of that result buffer mode. Now we're also in a default perspective view, so we can infinitely zoom in and out in that perspective view. We're not limited to the field of view parameters. And we're also in a default shaded work mode, which fully lights our scene from every single direction, which allows us to work in this OpenGL rendered environment. And the display modes are up on top here, so we can still go to wireframe, shaded work, and a shaded full uses the actual light sources that are there. We'll talk more about that later. Now let's say we want to edit this object after it's created. Let's go back to formZ 6. You can see that if I were to select the pick tool, pick on an object, nothing really happens. It's just sort of highlighted red. In order to access some of the parameters that we can change, we need to actually pull out some tools to do that. We can use the query information, query attributes, or the query parameters tool. Click on that object and it brings up a dialog which allows us to modify any parameters that are associated with that. We can then click the OK button, go back to modeling, and it'll automatically update. Now we can also access these by right-clicking the object and access those parameters there. So let's see what happens in formZ 7. Well, if you pick the object with the pick tool, all the information we need is right here in the tool options. So there's attributes, information, parameters, everything's there with instant access. Alright, so let's see how we can edit controls in previous versions of formZ. Well, we can right-click on the object and we can choose the Edit Controls. And this brings up a little dialog box which allows us to modify the object. We can only do what's limited within the Edit Controls dialog itself. So right now we can only move controls, and I can drag that control, and I'm not getting any numeric feedback. I can dynamically move that, and the coordinates palette is giving me the cursor position in 3D space, but it's not really giving me the exact height of the extrusion parameter that we have set there. So let's try this in formZ 7. Well, if we were to right-click on an object and show controls, you can see now we get those controls back. And when I start moving those controls, you can see that numeric information is displayed in the tool options palette over there, giving us instant access to all those parameters. Okay. Now, the show controls is not limited to just one object at a time. In formZ 7, you can now do it with multiple objects simultaneously. So if I were to select the vector line drawing tool, create another shape over here, let's create a circle over in this area. All right, and let's do a spline curve. Check the spline option here, click a few points, and there's a spline surface. Now I can right click on other objects and turn on the show controls, and you can see that I have some objects with the show controls turned on and some of them with them off. Now when these controls are on, we can have access to all the tools here. We're not limited to this edit controls palette in previous versions. We can use a pick tool if that's active, so I can go in and move that around if I want. I can use the transformation tools, the move, rotate, scale, whatever I want. So let's use the move tool, move a control around. I can hold the shift key down to grab multiple controls, something like that. All right. We can use the rotate tool. Let's grab and rotate a few of these controls over here. We get this nice little compass that shows up. We get guidelines. I'm going to talk more about guides in just a moment. We can move that around. And just a lot more flexible with being able to modify those controls by having access to all the tools over here when you're in the show control mode. Now I probably should mention this too. If you were to select multiple objects, you can even select all the objects if you want. And in the tool options over here, you can see that down at the bottom, there's some options and some buttons that you can globally either hide controls or show controls for all of the selected objects. So it's a quick way to turn them on or off for multiple objects at the same time. Okay. So if you want to turn them off, just do a Command A, hide controls, and they're all off now. Okay. One other thing I would like to show too is that you can actually edit the parameters simultaneously with any parameters that are the same for all the selected objects. If I were to select all these objects, notice that there's attributes, information, and parameters that are common for all those. For example, the height, I can type in 40 feet, and now they all change to 40 feet. If I make this 10 feet, all right, then they all change to 10 feet. That's a quick way to be able to edit multiple parameters on multiple objects all at the same time. So let's look at the transformations again. What I'm going to do is use the move tool, click on the object, and it's sliding across the XY plane. Well, if I want to move it perpendicular, there's no perpendicular switch down here. Where is it? Well, it's gone. And so now what you need to do is actually select the parallel or perpendicular option in the tool options, one-stop shop. Everything you need is in one location. So if you want to click on the perpendicular or parallel option, you can do that. A key shortcut for that is the command key. So I tap the command key, and every time I tap that command key, it's going to toggle that option. So I go perpendicular, tap the command key on Mac, control key on Windows, and it'll switch it to the opposite state. And if you're ever wondering what that key shortcut is, whenever a tool is active, look in the Actions palette over here, and you'll see it'll give you a list of the different key commands that are associated with that particular tool. All right, let's try another one. Let's do a rotation. Click on that object, and notice that we get some additional snapping points here. The blue dot here is going to represent the object's axis, and the magenta dot is going to represent the centroid of the object. So there's all sorts of helpful, useful information and feedback, visual feedback, when you're applying these operations, such as the compass and the snapping points and things like that, to be able to make sure that you can transform the object exactly that you want quickly and efficiently in your scene. All right. One more thing I might want to look at is the snaps. So let's take a look at the previous version here. All sorts of ways to control grid snapping, angle snapping, object snapping, and things like that. There's a guide tool. There's ortho snaps. There's object snaps. And if you want, you can only put one on at a time. If you want a combination snap, you click on the combo snap, then you right click, opens up a dialog, set that up, and you click OK and come back. And you know, there's a lot of control there, but there's a lot of icons there and a lot of clicking and opening up dialogs and things like that. Well, we've completely simplified the whole thing in formZ 7 now. Now everything's laid out for you down here at the bottom. All right, so here's our grid snap. Here's the parameters for it. Here's our ortho angle snap. There's only one tool, so it's either on or off. If it's on, just set whatever angle you want, and that's it. All of the object snaps are automatically listed for you. You can automatically create combination sets if you want, and by default it already has multiple ones turned on. You can globally turn that set on or off by clicking on the red circle slash. And there are some additional parameters, and that's in a floating palette now. So I can turn on the snap options palette inside of there by right clicking, or it's a palette that you can access from the palette's pull down menu. And like I said, that is a floating palette that you can leave open, put it on an external monitor, and you always have quick instant access to all those snapping parameters without having to go to any type of modal dialog. All right. So let's move on and look at some other aspects of some of the new features that are in formZ 7. All right, next let's talk about the new guides that are available in formZ, which are reference lines that you can snap to. Automatic guides are temporarily displayed during a modeling operation. The guide tool lets you add and save permanent guides in your project, and temporary guides are added and subtracted from the shift and space keys. If you want to delete all of your temporary guides, simply add the command key on Mac or the control key on Windows along with the shift and space keys, and all the temporary guides are deleted. And one more thing I'd like to mention too is that the shift key keeps you locked onto a guideline. Now, this is a brand new feature in formZ 7, so I can't show you how this worked in previous versions because the guide tools were not available in previous versions. So this is a brand new feature. So let's take a look at how those work in formZ 7. The first thing I want to look at is the automatic guides. Let's see how those work. Let's say I want to create a wall. So I select the vector line tool, look in tool options for my parameters. Let's make it wall. And as soon as I click, you'll see that I get a set of automatic guides. Now, I'm going to turn off the angle snap for just a moment. You can see that if I move along the red dash line, that's the x-axis, I can snap along the green guideline, which is the y-axis. And every time I click another point, you can see that it moves that automatic axis to the last click location. Okay. Now if I turn the angle snap on, notice we're getting these extra blue lines which are representing the actual angle snap that I have set there. So I can graphically, visually see the actual snap direction if I want. And I'm not locked to that. I can still move it somewhere else. However, if I do put the cursor on there, it will lock to that guide position. I'm going to turn that off for a second. Now also, if I were to click a point somewhere other than the X and Y direction, then you can see I get this additional magenta guide, which allows us to be tangent or perpendicular to my previous clicked point. And another thing that happens too is as I'm drawing my shape, if I were to move this along, if I reach a point that is perpendicular back to the first clicked point, then I get this additional gray guide, which tells me that if I click right now, this will take me right back perpendicular to my first clicked point. So no matter what angles you're drawing in 3D space, those guides are going to help you out, making sure things are lined up exactly the way you want. The next thing I want to talk about is a permanent guide, which is created with the guide tool. So with the guide tool, we can click 2 points anywhere, and it automatically creates a guideline. And that's a line that we can actually snap to. Now, one thing I like to do is snap on and click a couple times along the edge of an object. Now I have a guide along that object. If I want to create a guide from the center of this column over here, I can snap to the midpoint, and then I'm going to use that automatic guide. I'm going to move the cursor, snapping it to that automatic guide, click a second time to create my permanent guide so that it's parallel with the y-axis. Okay, so now we have a nice little guide that we can snap to the intersection here. So if you're creating a wall off of that, you can see I can actually snap to an intersection here and continue. Another type of guide that we can create is a temporary guide that's created on the fly by hitting the Shift and Space keys. So let's see how that works. I'm going to get rid of these guides here by using the delete tool. Now we can move, rotate, and put these permanent guides in different layers if we want, but I'm just going to delete them for now. And the temporary guide, like I said, is a guide that I can create by hitting the Shift and Space keys. So let's say I want to draw this line as I move across, and I want to line up with the center of that column. Well, if I don't have the guide there, I can cancel out, create a guide. I don't want to do that. I want to create it right on the fly. So in the middle of that operation, I'm going to snap to the bottom here. I'm not going to click. I'm just going to snap to that spot, hit the Shift and Space keys, and now you can see an XYZ guideline, a temporary set of guides is automatically created. So now I can snap along my automatic guide with the intersection of that temporary guide, and you can see that can guide me to position that exactly where I want it. Let's say I want to take this wall and bring it up to the endpoint over here. So I just snap over here, hit Shift Space, and now I have a nice guideline that's placed over there. All right, if you want to get rid of a guideline, if you hit the Shift and Space with the cursor already on a guide, then that guideline's gone. And like I said, if you add the Command key to the mix or the Control key on Windows, you can actually add that to the Shift and Space. So I'm hitting Shift, Command, Space, and it gets rid of all of those temporary guides if you want to clear those out. All right. Now, one more thing I want to show about the guides is, as I mentioned, you can hold down the Shift key to lock it along the guide. So let's see how that works. Let's say I want to take this object and I want to move it along the x-axis direction, and I want to align it so it's maybe to the center of this column over here. So as I'm moving it, if the cursor is on that guide, I can hold down the Shift key, and now you can see it actually locks it right on that guide. I can snap to the midpoint or the center point of that column, and now I know that that wall is now lined up with the center there. Okay, let's take a look at that again. If I were to move this, keep it along the guide, hold down the Shift key, snap to some other object, and now I can make sure that's aligned the way I want. The Shift key is going to let you lock it on that guideline. Next, let's take a brief look at the updated and enhanced reference plane features in formZ 7. The new automatic draw on face option practically eliminates the need to create reference planes in many cases. However, if you do use reference planes, then not only did we reduce the number of tools from 11 to only 2, we also made them easier and more dynamic. And we also introduced new underlay options, which makes underlays easier and more flexible in formZ 7. So let's see how these work. First thing I'm going to do is go back to formZ, a previous version, and let's see how they work in there. So let's say I want to create an object on the top face of this box over here. So if I select the spline drawing tool, there really is no method to be able to draw at that elevation level directly. So what we have to do is, one option is turn the object snap to be a face snap. So now you can see I can start drawing on the top face of that box. Well, as soon as I draw off the face of the box, my cursor now snaps down to the current reference plane. Okay, so the only way to continue drawing on the same elevation of the top face of the box would be to define a arbitrary reference plane. Now there's all sorts of tools to do that, and in conjunction with that, we do also have to set the topological level so we can actually define a plane by clicking on points, segments, faces, or on the object level. So let's choose point, let's choose the define reference plane tool, click on a few points here, and those 3 points will define a plane, and now that plane is now moved for us. So now I can continue to draw my shape on that continuous plane. All right, now there are some controls that allow you to edit that reference plane. Just go through the list of tools here. We can rotate it. If we look at the plane's palette, which isn't open by default, so we can open that up. And we can save it if we want by manually saving it. And that's pretty much about it. There's no real numeric parameters we can control that reference plane with. So there's a lot of features there. However, let's see how this works in formZ 7. Let's say I want to draw the spline on the top face of that box. Select the spline tool here. And notice that I just move the cursor over the existing objects. My drawing grid automatically moves onto the faces of the objects in the scene. So I can automatically draw right on the surface of that object without having to click on any other tools. Now, if I start drawing on that face, you can see if I do move off the face boundary, then it is going to project it back down onto the reference plane. So what I can do is if the cursor is on that face, I can tap the F5 key. If I tap that, it now locks the drawing grid at the current position of where it is. So I can continue to draw. And notice I didn't have to turn any options on or any object snaps or define planes or anything. This is just automatic by being able to draw on those planes. So that eliminates the need for reference planes in most cases. Now, if you do want to use reference planes, we have some new enhancements to that. For example, down here you can see there's only 2 tools. That's it. So I can actually use the Define Reference Plane tool, click on the face of any object, and it automatically creates a reference plane there. If I want to edit that reference plane, select the Edit Reference Plane tool, and now this gives me access to be able to move that and orientate that anywhere that I want in 3D space. So let's position it over here. I can control the size of the grid by extending that out. Now that drawing grid extends infinitely in your scene. However, the visual grid is just sort of a visual reference. Okay, we can rotate it, move it wherever we want, and just a lot more flexibility. Okay. Now, these reference planes, when you move them, are being automatically saved for you. So if we look at the Custom Reference Planes palette over here, you see that it's automatically saved for me, so I don't have to manually save anything. The palette's automatically there. I double click, gives us all sorts of parameters that we can change. Now this is a modal dialog. I like to use the floating palettes. We've gotten rid of most of those in formZ 7, so we can still open that up as a floating palette, and we can have instant access continuously to all of our reference plane parameters. Put that on an external monitor if we want. But also notice that we've added the capability to add numeric information. We can add an underlay if we want. We can control the transparency. And we can, by default, have that underlay extend to the extents of the reference plane, which will stretch it and distort it as we change that grid size, or we can set it to an actual size, so we can set a scale and size to that. Now, another neat way to be able to actually control the size of the underlay would be to use the Measure tool. The Measure tool has a new feature which allows us to actually scale objects based on the measured value. So this works on objects. This also works on reference planes. So if I were to measure a distance on that plane, we can actually update that. So let's get a more meaningful sketch for this. Let's load any pixel image. Here I have a sketch underlay JPEG image. Bring that in. All right. And let's measure part of that. If I do measure from here to here, you see it'll give me a distance, and it says that's about 5 feet. Well, really, that room of that sketch should be 20 feet. So I'll type in 20 feet in the distance and click Update. And you can see that that underlay sketch is now scaled so that that distance will be 20 feet. And of course, since that underlay is related to that reference plane, I can use the Edit Reference Plane tool to be able to move that anywhere that I want. So whether it's a elevation sketch or a plan sketch, I can place that on multiple different reference planes and have as many reference planes as I want. All right, so those are just some of the new reference plane features in formZ 7. Another new feature in formZ 7 is the elimination of preview dialogs, which lets you edit parameters directly in your space. This lets you manipulate the object within the context of the surrounding environment instead of being isolated in a separate preview window. So let's see how this works. In formZ 7, we're going to start a brand new project, and let's say we're going to create some kind of a bench. So what I'll do is start by drawing a path for the sweep operation. So I'll use the arc tools, 2D arc, and notice that as I'm drawing shapes, we get all sorts of additional visual feedback for the type of geometry that we're creating, which helps us guide us to create the shape that we want. Now, another new thing is I tap the Command key. You can see you can automatically toggle the direction of that arc. In previous versions, you would have to switch to a different arc tool to change the direction. Now we can just tap the Command key to be able to flip that over. Okay, let's create a cross section. This is another neat way that we're going to see how these guides are going to really help us out. If I select the vector line tool and I just start clicking, I'm going to draw it on the side so we can see it better. I get the guide, go up. This is going to be cross section of the seat for the bench. Go over this way, and the guides are going to make sure that everything's lined up exactly the way I want. Now, as I pull it down here, I want a control point to be the same as the top of the seat over here. So to get that lined up, I can just move the cursor over here, hit the shift space. Now I get a temporary guide that I can snap to the intersection. Move along this guide, I get the gray guide, which lets me go perpendicular back to the beginning, and that's how quick and easy in one single operation I can create a nice aligned cross-sectional shape that looks like that. So let's go to the sweep tool, and what I'll do is pick the source shape. Now you don't have to set any topological modifiers. In previous versions you had to click on another tool to tell it whether it's points or segments or faces that you're trying to sweep. Here you just move the cursor over the scene, and whatever's highlighted red, that's going to be your source. So it can be a segment or an outline or a face of an object. So I click on that. Next I click on my path, and there, now that source shape is picked up and swept along that path. Notice that there's no dialog. We're still in the context of our project, so it's swept right there in place. And if we can click on the circle, we can control the orientation of how the source shape is aligned with the path. I get the guides that make sure that things are snapping in the right position, so I can snap it so it's perpendicular straight up like that. We can move the position of the source shape, move it up so it's above the path line or below that path line. I can also click on the horizontal line, which allows us to move it away or inside of that path line. So let's say we're doing some crown molding. We can make sure that the crown molding is lined up in the wall, in the modeling window itself, and align it right directly on that wall. Now we can scale the source shape, and so all the parameters that were in that dialog are now available here dynamically in the modeling window. Now we can also edit the source shape here too. So I can grab the controls of that source shape, so I can pull this in a little bit. And one thing you'll notice that when I'm dragging these controls, notice that the default XY plane's here, but as soon as I click on one of those controls that define that source shape, my drawing grid automatically moves and adjusts to keep a planar relationship for that source shape. So all this stuff is going on behind the scenes to keep everything lined up nice and neat for you. All right, and of course we can edit the path and things like that. Okay, now what about the other parameters that you can't do dynamically? Well, those are all located inside the tool options over here. One-stop shop, like I said. So additional parameters such as capping and whether it's smooth or faceted, those are parameters that you can still access over here. But it's all in the context of the actual modeling window. Now as we continue on, let's say we want to revolve and continue on with the shape of this thing. We can create a temporary column here. Or maybe there's some other object that's over here, and then using the revolve tool, I can simply select a segment, face, outline, whatever I click on there, and I click on an edge of any object, and it automatically revolves around that. It's all within the context of our project, so there's no extra dialogue that we go into. Again, we can dynamically modify any of those parameters, and additional parameters are available inside of the tool options. So that's how much faster and flexible it is now to do these same operations in formZ 7, a lot quicker and easier with more flexibility. Another new feature in formZ 7 is the new Reshape tools, which lets you dynamically sculpt your objects. There's also a new Insert option in the drawing tools, which lets you add or subtract to an object using just the drawing tools. And these new tools replace and drastically exceed the capabilities of the insertion modifiers in previous versions. And it should be mentioned that these features are real-time, live, dynamic Boolean operations resulting in good, clean, solid objects. All right, if we go back into a previous version of formZ, we had somewhat similar reshaping capabilities using the insertion modifiers here, but I'm not even going to go into those because it's so much faster and flexible and can do so much more in 7 that I'm just going to jump right into 7 here and show you how these work. What I'm going to do is start off with just a simple object. For example, extrude a rectangle to create a box. And let's say we want to sculpt this, add and subtract some volume. Well, as we saw earlier, you can see that with the drawing tools, I can draw on the face of an existing object. But these are creating separate objects. Okay, so if I undo, you can see there's a new insert option. If I turn that on, now if I'm drawing on the face of an object, I'm actually inserting that object into that existing object. So I can actually reshape it inward to subtract volume or pull it up to add volume to the object. Okay, do the same thing over here. Let's draw another shape over there. And this works with all the drawing tools, whether it's a vector line, spline, rectangle, whatever you're using. If I draw on the face of an object, push it inward, I can go all the way through and punch a hole through that object. Okay, the reshaping tools are located over here, and these are my favorite tools here. First one we'll look at is offset segment, and with that I can click on the edge of any object and offset a segment, and it actually inserts a new edge into the object for us. If I select the reshape tool, that allows us to select the face of any object, and I can actually reshape it out to add volume or reshape it inward, and that will subtract volume to the object. See that? All right, so now if I were to pull this out, we'll add another extension to the wall there. If I reshape this inward, you can see I can snap it to this vertical edge, and it heals that geometry because it's real-time Boolean operations that are going on there. Pull it out this way, you get that, all right? You can also offset multiple edges at the same time. Just hold down the Shift key. So use the offset segment tool, hold down the Shift key, and select multiple edges and drag them all at the same time. So now if I use the reshape tool, I can pull it out, and we're adding that new feature to our object. We can use the offset outline, which allows us to select any boundary, and it'll create an offset profile based on that face. We can go out or we can go in, doesn't really matter. And if we reshape, now you can see that it actually is part of that geometry now. So I can reshape that in a little bit to create a nice little parapet for the roof if we want, or we can actually extend it all the way through and punch a hole all the way through the object to be able to open up that section. The last one is the imprint, which allows us to take an existing 2D shape and imprint it into an object. So here I'll draw with the rectangle tool a 2D shape without the insert, so that's created as a separate object. And I can make some changes to that if I want. Perhaps I want to use the line editing tools, add some fillets or bevels to that, something like that. And then when I'm all done making changes to the 2D shape, I can then use the imprint to take the 2D shape, click on my object, and now that's imprinted into the object. So I reshape, push that in a little bit to create a nice little recessed area that looks like that. All right, so this is a real quick look at some of these reshaping tools, and if you want to find out more about that, I'd like to invite you to our website. Go to the webinars, formZ.com, webinars on demand button, and there's an excellent 30-minute project that we do in which we build this contemporary residence in about 30 minutes using primarily just those reshaping tools. So we start with just a box, and then we sculpt it into a more complex form, and you can learn a lot about how those reshaping tools work watching that presentation. Now this is just a small representative sample of just a few of the many new tools and features that are in the new formZ 7. And this concludes the fast migration to formZ 7 presentation.